All right, well, welcome everybody. It's Christy from Joyful Art Studio. Thank you for your patience with me and not coming on yesterday. We just had a lot going on at our house, and so I just needed to do it today instead. So welcome. And today I thought it would be fun to do just paint some gems and some geodes, because those are, especially gems, they're just fun and relaxing and just something kind of calming to the mind. You could just draw them. They're very organic in their shape, and so it's just super fun. So today I have got some different supplies. I've got some watercolor paper, which I love this Canson brand. It's my favorite. So I've got that. And then I have got a Sharpie because it's permanent, won't bleed. I've got some watercolor paints, just some good old Crayola ones. And then I have got some, I've got some black oil pastels and some white oil pastels. And if you had some color ones, those might be fun too, but you don't have to. Here's some random oil pastels. They're kind of fun for the layers and the geode, but we're gonna do a gem first. So for this, I actually encourage you to possibly watch along and then make gems till your heart's content, because it's kind of a fun thing to do and it's relaxing. And I know that sometimes on the video it's kind of hard to follow along and do the project at the same time. Oh, I've also got my water. I have a little bit of this coarse salt, if you have some of that. Just depending on the size of your salt, that'll change the effect. And then I've got a brush. So you can see I already drew one here, just to kind of give you an idea of where we're going with this. And of course, everybody's is going to look different and unique. So I'm going to come over here and show you how I got that shape. So the first thing we want to do is draw a polygon. So we're going to do the contour line, which is the outside line of the gem. And so those are just going to, so see, there I've got my contour line of my gem, and it's not perfect, and that's okay when you find gems and they are not perfect. So anyway, I'm going to come in here and put some dots about approximately an inch apart. Again, no rhyme or reason. It'll all kind of come together when you get to that final line work. So I've got this outer contour line, and then I've got these inner dots. So I'm going to start connecting these with some random triangles to the outer edges. See how I'm doing that? Just coming in, and sometimes they might not necessarily be a triangle, might be another little shape that's kind of fun. And then you'll see at the end how this comes together. And for younger kids doing this, this might not necessarily make sense to them. Just have them do some contour shapes with straight lines and then some triangles with the dots in the center, and then they'll kind of see it at the end, how you get that gem. Okay, and so there I have that part. And so we're just gonna kind of join some of these. I'm gonna bring this one in here, maybe bring this one here, there, and maybe a little sliver there. And so then there we have our gem. And so as far as painting it, once you get to that part, and if you guys are leaving comments, for some reason it is not showing them to me today. So I will attempt to figure that out. But anyway, shoot me some messages. Shoot me some thumbs up if this is showing okay on your end. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing comments today, but that's okay. All right, I'm gonna get my brush wet. And so what I want you to think about as far as colors go with your gem is analogous colors. And what analogous colors are colors that are next door to each other on the color wheel. So if I was going to do a blue gem, I'm going to be working in this area. If I was going to be doing a red gem over here. They're basically next door neighbors in the color wheel. Or you can think about it as just use warm colors and just use cool colors. And the reason for that is because we want to have them nice and vibrant. We don't want to make mud. When you start mixing colors that are complementary or on opposite sides of the color wheel, that's where you get lots of mud. And so here we go. What I'm doing is putting drops of water in my cool colors. So I'm going to go with these purples and blues, and that's just going to prime my watercolor set and get it ready. And you could do this with, I taught you the other day how to use markers as watercolor. This will be a great way to do that. Or you could even kids could color them with colored pencils or with markers. Okay. Oh, I have some up there. Interesting. Okay, I really have no idea why my comments are not showing up today. But anyway, that's all right. I will check them out when I'm done. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to choose some of these to do as my darkest color, which for me, I'm gonna do this navy here. And what I wanna do, the first thing I'm gonna do is what's called a wet on wet technique. And so I'm gonna take my clean water on my brush. I'm tapping it off a little bit because I don't wanna make a lake in there. I just wanna wet it. So I'm gonna come in here and I'm going to paint. You can see, you might be able to see that it has a slight tint to it, and that is okay. And so my triangle is going to be a little bit wet. I'm just painting in that. And maybe sometimes if you feel like I feel like looking at this one, these are a bit going into the gem, so I might make those both dark. But it doesn't really matter. And we want this to be nice and juicy, so we can do a bit of a salt technique, which I'm going to show you. Then I'm going to paint this one. So I've got, if you can't tell, this one's wet, this, and this one's got a bit much. So I'm going to pull some of that up and watch what happens. I'm just going to touch it with that blue. And it will start to spread. And if it doesn't spread as much as you want, you just add more color. Or you could push it around in there. I love to watch it spread and see what happens. The little spreading portion of it is called the bloom. Thought I said this one was wet. It's not acting wet, but maybe I didn't put enough water. So see all these little bleeding parts? Those are called the bloom. And what I love about watercolor is you don't have a ton of control over it besides where your wet paper is. So here I've got these navies and they're still really wet, and so I could come in. I'm going to take a little bit of this salt, and I have a pretty coarse salt today, and I'm just sprinkling it on there. And you also may notice that my blue is staying within the triangle that I painted, and that is because these ones over here are dry. that's one way of controlling your watercolor paper. Your watercolor painting is by keeping your paint within that section and it won't bleed. And then I'm gonna let that dry with this salt crystals. And I'm gonna move on to another color. All right, so I'm gonna stay within my cool family, and I'm gonna go in with one of these more vibrant blues. I'm going to come over here again. I'm gonna paint it with a little bit of water. I've got my paper towel in case I have too much, which sometimes happens. It's just kind of a learning, a balance, figuring that out, playing with it. You really have to play with your art supplies in order to figure out what they do. Piece of salt stuck to that. All right, come and get some of this blue. I love this color. I'm just touching it, kind of helping it move to the edges of my shapes. That one has some interesting blooming going on. And I could again add salt to those. And so what the salt does is it will, as the paint dries, the salt will absorb the pigment. There's several different techniques with using things around the house you could use. Salt gives a great texture for the gems. A couple weeks ago in art lab, we used salt and saw how it absorbed the pigment, the color in the paint. And then we also used rubbing alcohol. And what the alcohol does is it pushes the pigment away. So you'll get all these little tie-dye bursts, which is really a pretty thing to do too. Okay, so now I just gotta do my lighter ones. Touch. Too much water. You could do a whole page of just shapes and start filling them in. It's very relaxing and calming to your mind. You don't have to think a lot about it. And if you do it to where if I'd let these blues dry before I came in with this other water, you could go in with some other colors if you were doing something else. Something maybe you have a mandala stencil or something that would be fun to paint in all the little shapes. Let's see. Maybe I'll do a little bit of this purple. Got a runaway salt there, but that's okay. So if you are new here, I'm Christy with Joyful Art Studio, and I teach art to kids and adults. And while we've been home on quarantine, I have been doing some free art lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays on my business page, which is Joyful Art Studio with Christy. I also teach on enrichment on OutSchool, an online schooling community with kids aged, preschool through age 18. There's hundreds and hundreds of classes there, and I teach my art lab there, painting, look at different artists and get inspiration from them, learn a little art history and do projects. And those classes have been, you know, ages mid-elementary, although I've had some little guys in there, and those guys do great as well. Really, every art is really kid led, and if there's a child that wants to do stuff, by all means let them play around and try. You just want to avoid all that frustration. So I'm going to put some salt here. You really have to wait till it dries, and once it's dry, your paint, you can brush off the salt. Some of them get a little sticky because like these are getting really saturated. And then you could do some more. And in a minute, we will do a geode. Let me just make sure I don't have any questions up here. Nope, no questions. All right, awesome. I still am not seeing my comments, and I'm not exactly, oh, there we go. I figured it out. I got it. Okay. Perfect. You guys able to see that? I feel like now that I'm seeing it on the big screen, it's kind of off a little bit today. Anyway, I'll draw another one while that one's drying. Maybe this one's kind of more of a traditional shape. Here we go. So I did my outer contour line. That was, are you guys even seeing that? I feel like you're not. Let's try that. I can see comments now, so if you can see that or I need to move it, let me know. There we go. So I have my outer contour line. I've built up my triangles, and then maybe this one, I just have some of these shapes coming in like that. We can do this one in some warm colors. Need to load those up, prime those. And I decided to do the video from overhead this time. Since I'm working with watercolors, it just seems to go better because of the drip factor. It doesn't like to be elevated, where acrylics and tempera and other mediums can tolerate that. So I'm going to come in here, throw in some water, some of these triangles. I'm going to do all the outer ones and just see what happens, how it looks. Throw some red in these. It's one nice thing about these Crayola sets. They're really inexpensive and they have really vibrant colors. And they're one of the only cheaper brands that has a really great red. Some of those other brands, like the $5 section at Michael's, those ones, they have great colors, but their red is really poor. Red's a more expensive pigment, so that's primarily why. You'll notice if you get into more fine art, when you get into the reds, they are more they cost a lot more, especially those beautiful magentas. They're just harder to make. The pigments are more expensive. So let's do some lighter shades. And I'm going to let that bleed a little bit just for fun. Why not? Let's just see what happens. The red's pretty strong, so it will want to jump in here with my lighter warm colors. Get some yellow. Here we go. And I'm not going to put any salt on this one because I want to be able to flip the page so we can do some fun texture stuff with the geodes. But I'm going to dry this one real quick and show you the texture that forms from these salt crystals. I got all kinds of stuff on my way today, don't I? In my art space. I taught some classes today online on OutSchool, and so my area is being taken over. Somebody asked me about my little fan, a couple people where I got it, and I got it from Amazon. It was just a little portable handheld fan. It wasn't very expensive. It charges with USB. I like it because it's not very loud and it's very light, and I can just keep it in my little art kit. And when I do classes on the go, I don't have to search for a power outlet. And it won't burn my paint like the heat tools that I've also used before. Okay. Maybe a fun one would be, you know, maybe an elongated one while we're sitting here. So what if I did... See what that kind would look like while we're drying. And if you didn't want your lines so bold, you could definitely use a thinner Sharpie. Just something that's not going to bleed when you get it wet. I feel like I want this one to have a little out part. And so you'll have a different effect if you don't do the wet on wet. So for these, you can see that I'm not wetting it first with clear water, and you can see the difference. It's more just traditional painting. My paintbrush needs to be really juicy with pigment, where I'm going to get dry spaces. It doesn't run, it just stays wherever I am painting. I need to keep collecting water so that my pigment will move. On my paper, this would be a wet on dry, where my brush is the wet and the paper's dry, where this technique was wet on wet. So my paper was wet in the section I wanted to paint, and the brush was wet. So just a couple little... And this technique would not really work so well with the salt because it's not wet enough. You really need to have it wet enough that the salt has something to absorb. And Julie is not in here today. We are starting chickens, and so we have a bunch of baby chicks, and she is been out playing with them and making sure that she is playing the mother hen. So she is out there doing that. Oh, thank you, Kathy. I'm still not seeing my comments on my big screen. I don't know. Facebook doesn't like me today. They probably changed something again. They love to do that. But so see how, like, I just love how vibrant these Crayola ones are. Let's do this. Give some shapes in the center. There we go. That works. And then we'll flip and do some geodes. And we're gonna, so for our geodes, we are actually gonna draw with oil pastel. Because if you look at photographs of geodes, I did not have any photographs that I personally owned. So I didn't have any I could show you without breaking copyright. But look up some pictures online of geodes for inspiration. And you could see all the layers, and we're going to do some layering with that. This purple is about the same, isn't it? Anyway, and then the oil pastel really lends itself nicely to the texture, that bumpy texture on the edges of the geodes. And we'll still do the salt on those because it's super fun. So anyway, these are our fun little gems. And you could play with, you know, adding more water to your paint to make some parts a lighter value. I'm gonna do this so I can flip my page, but you can see that fun texture in there. That even gives a fun texture. So let's brush this away. So see these parts where the pigment was and the salt absorbed that pigment there and gives a really fun texture. Look at that. All these little like bursts of white floral. Love it. It's perfect for this kind of a project. All right, let's turn the page. Put that right there. So now let's do some geodes. So we'll do a few different kinds. So, you know, if you've looked at geodes, they're multi-layered. And so if you only have a black oil pastel or crayon, that's totally fine. You could start out, and there again, an organic shape, so no, it doesn't really fall into the category of a circle, a square, oval, triangle. All those goodies are organic, so they are free-flowing, and they just kind of do their own thing. So I'm going to come in here, and I have doing this one with black. And so see, I've got that outer black layer. And they kind of go in rings, if you've ever noticed that. So on this one, I could, if I'm going to do a dark one, I could do some rings with my black. And they tend to have a darker value on the outside, and they get lighter in value as they go in. Another way to do it is if you have some crayons will work, or oil pastels in some colors. Picking some that kind of go really well together. I'm going to start off with a brown on the outside, because usually they kind of have a bit of a rock layer that is not as colorful. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm coming right inside and following that same organic shape. And then now I'm going to bring in some colors. So I'm going to come in here and follow this with maybe some teal, and then maybe it's going to change a little bit, and I've got this green, and I am staying within, you know, the same color family, so I've got my cool colors there. And then maybe it'll become more yellow as it gets in. And so what's happening with these is, so we're using oil pastels. And so oil pastels react in a way that I can even show you over here. So I can make a little square of my oil pastel. and I'll put a little box around it kind of to demonstrate. And what happens with oil pastel, because it's oil and water don't mix. Our watercolors are water-based. So I can come in here with some paint, and what happens is it repels the water, and it makes a nice border too. But you can paint right over it, and you can see that it's beating up a little bit where the oil pastel is. But it's also filling in those spaces where my lines are, and they don't smear because they're water resistant, they're oil. So they're really fun to use when you're using watercolor. You can draw with them, make lines and marks, and they will not go anywhere with your watercolor. Okay, so on this one, let's see. Maybe I'll do some red. And I'm gonna again do my wet on wet. I'm gonna fill in this outer circle with my water. I'm gonna get some of this beautiful red. And my outer layer is usually, I'm gonna mix a couple different reds just to have a variety in my tone, in my hue. So I'm using that real fiery red and then putting in a bit of an orangey red. Okay. All right, so then I'm gonna come in with a lighter hue, which I'm gonna use orange, and I already forgot. I'm gonna do my wet on wet so we can do our salt in here. These are just really relaxing, just simple things that anybody can draw, because you're just going for an idea. You're not trying to draw something realistic, which I know frustrates some people. And it's a fun way to play with your watercolors, which is super important. Like, you can't learn how to use your supplies and what they do just by always following along. You have to want to just play and be willing to mess up. Be willing to make those mistakes. You can kind of see how it's beating up in the center here with that oil pastel. I'm going to drop some yellow in here. Kind of going over those lines a little bit. That oil pastel was really juicy, so because I want these colors to blend just a little bit. And then let's get some salt in here while he's nice and wet. There we go. Let that guy dry. And let's move over here to this guy. And so I'm going to do this one in cool tones. I'm going to kind of go a little bit similar to what I have laid down with my oil pastel color, but not exact, because I would like the variety in the shapes and colors. So let's see. I'm going to actually come in with some blue. Drop that in. Watch that bleed out there. So fun. And then I'm going to bring in some green too, because I know those will blend really beautifully. And make a beautiful sea green color. Come in here. I'm going to start with green on here. Here we go. All right. Let's get going right here. So I'm going to make my value lighter as I go in, and so I want to use more water. So I'm going to get some water on my brush. I'm going to get some of this green, and I'm actually going to use this lid as a palette, get up some of that juicy paint, add more water to it, so that, see how that's a lighter value of green? And then I can also do that darker green that we used, bring it out here, add more water to it, and still bring it in here, so it's the same green but a lighter value. All right. Maybe I want a little hint of blue in here too. Just some dots to give it some fun texture. And again, I'm gonna drop on some salt, see what happens. Okay, so now we just have to wait for this to dry, and so we can flake it off. Let me go ahead and do it with my little fan. So what do you guys want to do on Thursday? I haven't thought that far ahead yet. Shoot me some ideas, everyone. Oh, Ryan, so these are the Geodes, and I'm using black oil pastel today. You could get the same effect from a black crayon. The difference is that the black crayon is not going to be quite as intense. So here's a black oil pastel. See how soft that is? And then, I don't know if I have a black crayon in here. Anyway, but my black crayon is going to be lighter. They just aren't as soft. But they'll have the same water repelling effect that oil pastels do. So all the lines in these geodes are oil pastels. So it's just something to play with. It's fun for kids. And then in the beginning of the video, we talked about doing gems, and so this was the gems that I drew, and I did those with a Sharpie and watercolor, just using different hues and staying in the same coloring. And yeah, it kind of keeps it from being a hot mess, Ryan, because right here I did an example of the oil pastel, and then I painted over it, and because it's filled with oil, of course it repels the water, and it doesn't want to cross that line. In some places I kind of helped it because I wanted it to do that, but it does. But you can't control the line as much. You're always going to end up with a very thick black line with that, instead of having, you can't do anything small and detailed so much with the oil pastel. Yeah, it would be great with a one-line picture. Or like, remember when we, in watercolor class, we talked about Ted Harrison? It would be fun to do his lines in a color, you know, because his work, we did it as a positive image technique, but you could use colored oil pastels or even crayons, and it will do the same thing. Crayons won't resist as much, but they will still not bleed or move on your paper. And these were nice and juicy, so they're taking a bit to dry. I could help them along a little bit though, so we could see what kind of textures we ended up with here. And these are super fun for kids, and the gems are fun for adults because they're just relaxing. It's just filling in shapes. Sometimes when I was a kid, did you ever just do scribble art? I did that all the time when I just didn't know what I wanted to do, and I just needed a brain break. And I can remember so many times just taking some paper and taking a marker and scribbling loosely all over my paper, and then just filling in the shapes with different colors. And whether I was using colored pencils or markers or paint, it was just very therapeutic. And so if you're ever just sitting, or maybe you're sitting with your kids, or you want to do something but you don't know what, just draw some scribbles on your page loosely and start filling those in. You could even test, use different colors and see. All right, let's just see. It's not really dry yet totally, but I'm doing it this way because it's not totally dry, but mine was nice and wet. But see, you've got some of those starbursts in there. See that? If I let it dry naturally, it will have a much cooler effect. Okay? And so what I was talking about with the scribbles, sometimes I would just kind of start and just kind of intuitively fill my page with line. So I end up with all these shapes. Maybe I want some here. And then just coming in and painting these spaces. You could use your salt with it, and it's just relaxing, and it's so good for your brain just to kind of get lost in filling in those spaces. That's why adult coloring books are so popular, because it just kind of, you don't have to think about what you're going to draw, or maybe you don't feel like you can draw. But drawing really is a learned skill. I mean, did you know how to draw your name when you were a toddler? Nope. You had to figure that out. So you learned how to draw your name so you could learn how to draw things. Some people, yes, it comes naturally, but it definitely can be a learned skill, and it's learning, not only learning how to connect the lines in certain ways in certain directions, but it's about learning to see and seeing what's out there. Okay, so draw some scribbles, draw some geodes, do some gems. Just get out there, get creating, and have fun, and share your work with me. If you have any questions, I'll check them out afterwards. I'm not sure why Facebook was giving me a rough time with my comments, but anyway, I want to see what you have to say. Thanks for joining me.